A little slow today, as happens. Go ahead and get going in just a moment with our Spinoza.
Now recording.
There we go. Wonderful. Spinoza-ing. Short moment. Good. Resized right. So I can have it in the recording. This book is just, PDF is just large enough to be just annoying. Favorite thing when this happens. I'll have to deal with it being slightly weirdly shaped. Fine, I think.
That's what she said.
Something like that. Oh, come on. I can do this. Let's see. How you doing, Jean Claire? Hopefully well. Just gonna awkwardly fit on this a bit, which is fine. I'm having one of those long days. One of those long days. Are not getting any shorter, that's for sure. Goddamn. All right. So let's go ahead and kick off our reading of Spinoza. We finished off affection and affect last time, right? Please tell me I at least remember that much.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. So we'll move on to attribute. Attributes of substances, how bodies and substances have attributes, what is between them, how things work. Once again, heading back to logic of sense pretty crisply. So I'll kick us off and say hello, everyone. Welcome to the Deleuze Guattari Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Deleuze's practical philosophy, that of Spinoza. We are making our way through the glossary section of the book, which is going very slowly. So we'll see how far we can get going before we actually make it through maybe 2 words here, perhaps. That'd be lovely. I'll just go ahead and jump into attribute, and we'll just make our way and pile through. Attribute. What the intellect perceives of substance as always constituting its essence. Ethics 1, Definition 4. The attributes are not ways of seeing pertaining to the intellect, because the Spinozist intellect perceives only what is. They're not emanations either, because there is no superiority, no immanence of substance over the attributes, nor of one attribute over another. Each attribute expresses a certain essence. If the attribute necessarily relates to the intellect, this is not because it resides in the intellect, but because it is expressive, and because what it expresses necessarily implies an intellect that perceives it. The essence that is expressed is an unlimited, infinite quality. The expressive attribute relates essence to substance, and it is at this immanent revelation that the intellect grasps. All the essences distinct in the attributes are as one in substance, to which they are related by attributes. This is Deleuze bringing in that logic of sense stuff. Like or in logic of sense, bringing in the Spinoza stuff, I suppose. I just happened to be going back over this with someone else this last week. Short version. The way that substance has what we would call attributes, qualities, qualia, various things, the way that a tree is green, or a tree greens, or the way that a ball spins, things like that. These attributes are ways of seeing pertaining to intellect, because the intellect perceives what it is. They're not emanations. No superiority, no substance over attributes or attributes over substance or over each other. It is expressing this essence. I'm sure, Derek, you want to go through each line here, so I'm kind of just giving a mini version, but if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, so, I mean, last week I think these entries, even though they're alphabetical, are definitely linked together, or at least this is linked to the previous one. And in that one, we had the idea of adequate and inadequate ideas. And the adequate ideas are those that express the essence of the affecting body. And I think that's what we're kind of dealing with now in the attribute. So the definition, this is
Ooh, Derek, you're cutting out and going robot-y.
what the interceives or substance. All right, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, just you're going a bit in and out, just mentioning.
Okay, sorry, just tell me again, because I just have to log out and log in again. So again, yeah, we have that notion of adequate and inadequate ideas, and the adequate ideas give us access to the essence of the affecting body, and we had that notion of passions and actions, and actions are the are not the passions. They're the ones which give us access to the through access to the essence of the bodies. You know, that it's an active. Yeah, the joys, the passions. They're not passions. They're active joys. I think that anyway. That's a very quick kind of summary. But in the attribute, a kind of point of the attribute, I would say, is that the quote, the definition that it begins with gives us what the point is what the intellect perceives of substance as constituting its essence. So that there are a connection between intellect perceives of substance as constituting its essence. So this is what the attribute does. It allows the intellect, or let's say the mind, but the intellect, what it perceives of substance as constituting its essence. And this is what allows the actions as opposed to the passions to kind of form. We need direct access to the essence of the affecting body. Then he said the attributes are not ways of seeing pertaining to the intellect, because the Spinoza's intellect perceives only what is there. And he said, well, he goes through he lists what they're not. They're not ways of seeing through which the intellect sees. And he said they're not emanations either. And this is I think this notion of emanations is really important for this entry. He said they're not emanations either, because there is no superiority, no eminence of substance over the attributes, nor of one attribute over another. So nothing has superiority. And I think that we'll see this at the end of the kind of the significance of this what he's saying here. And then we've got this idea, which I think we've kind of also is seen in the logic of sense. He said each attribute expresses a certain essence. I mean, I would say the question is, I'm not sure if it expresses it in the same way as in the logic of sense, because the expression of logic of sense is linguistic. Whether it's the same here, I don't know. But he said that each attribute is a certain essence. So again, it's this kind of, it's allowing us access to the essence. These are the adequate ideas as opposed to the inadequate ideas. And he says so each attribute expresses a certain essence. If the attribute necessarily relates to the intellect, it's not because it resides in the intellect, because it is expressive, because what it expresses necessarily implies an intellect that perceives it. So this kind of the expressive nature of the attribute implies the intellect. So in other words, the word imply is obviously an important word for Deleuze, and it implicates, it implies it within it. It implies intellect that perceives it. So what he's doing is he's giving us a structure how intellect, substance, essence, and attribute, how they're kind of linked together. So he said the essence that is expressive is an unlimited, infinite quality, and so it has this aspect which is kind of also related to God. I would say that it's infinite, unlimited, infinite quality. And the expressive attribute relates essence to substance, and it is this immanent relate. So it's immanent, so it's interior. It's not an exterior, because what he says, if we go back to the previous entry, the last paragraph, he says, so long as our feeling or effect spring from external encounter. So this is our external encounter. They explain by that it gives us only access to inadequate ideas, whereas this immanence, it's immanent. The expressive relates essence to, and it is this immanent relation the intellect grasps. So this is that kind of the notion of the actions, how they're formed, I would say, in this. All the essences distinct in the attributes are as one in substance, to which they're related by the. So again, we've got this kind of everything's the essences are distinct, so that they're like they're individual, distinct in the attributes, are as one in substance. And again, I think we'll see as we go through this the significance of the notion of being one in substance, to which they're related by, and then they're related by the attributes. So everything's kind of linked there.
So is the adequate and inadequate ideas, do they belong to the realm of the mind, the thinking part? These are like one of the two modes, right? And they each one, the body, the extension, and the mind express the attributes, and the adequate or inadequate ideas pertain to the mind, right? The thinking. Would that be true?
No, I think the adequate ideas are given by an image, so it's a confused image, and we have what he says is an exterior relation, whereas what he's talking about now, this is an immanent relationship, so it's interior to ourselves.
You're saying that the image is the adequate idea or the inadequate idea?
No, it's the inadequate idea.
The image is an inadequate idea, but the adequate idea is not an image, right?
He says, right, I mean, this is what we did last week, but he says the idea is adequate instead of being a confused image. So it's the inadequate idea is a confused image. So we can get we go to adequate ideas.
Yeah.
Which directly expresses the essence of the affecting body, so involve it indirectly. So it's a kind of we have direct access to it, and as he said, it's not a passion, it's an action. But this section, the attribute, as he said, it starts with it says what it is in that definition, what the intellect perceives of substance. So this is focusing on substance and what constitutes. The idea is that we have. I think what comes from last week is that we have direct. We directly encounter the essence of things, let's say substance, to use that kind of language. And so the relation between, perhaps a question from that, well, how does it do this? And I think the attribute, this is begins to kind of talk about that. So the attribute, through the definition it starts with, is what the intellect perceives of substance as constituting its essence. So it's the attribute which is kind of central to this, I would say. So each attribute, as he says, expresses a certain essence, but it also implicates an intellect that perceives it. So it has this kind of role, it seems, of expressing essence but also implicating intellect.
Yeah,
And then we go back to the
the expressive essence is expressed by way of how the intellect understands that expression is by way of either the mind, or both the mind and the body, right? Those are the two ways that the intellect, um, understands the expression of the attributes. But the attributes are infinite, of course. But the intellect only understands the expression in these two forms, by way of the body and by way of the mind. And maybe the inadequate image relates to the body, where the passions arise and is a form of confusion. But if it's a adequate idea, then it's understood as understood by way of the mind. So maybe that's how they relate to each other, the inadequate and the adequate ideas. One pertains to
Yeah,
the mind.
I'm not sure about that, because he says that, as you said, he said straight after the definition, he said the attributes are not ways of seeing pertain to the intellect. So they're not the ways. And I think this is a constant theme throughout, that it's not like we consciously inspect what's going on. So they're not ways of seeing, and that goes back to the first chapter or second chapter, when he talks about the consciousness is kind of relegated in favor of the unconscious. So it's not a conscious kind of comparing. I mean, we read that last week, and I think I think that there is a relationship between them, but he says with the attribute, whereas it implies an intellect. So that word implies is really important. It implies. It kind of, the word, obviously, I mean, that's a kind of Spinoza, I don't know, a Deleuzian term, isn't it? And it always implies, the kind of the way in which Spinoza talks about it is a kind of notion of folding. So it implies an intellect that perceives it. So it's not the brain or the mind somehow being in charge of all this. There is this kind of in which there's a relationship between the essences, the attributes, substance, and what he calls the intellect. There is this relationship that's being set up, I think, within this first.
Yeah, that's kind of how I read it too. The relationship, because the next sentence is the expressive attribute relates essence to substance, and it is this immanent relation that the intellect grasps. So when we're talking about like what the intellect understands, how the intellect sees a thing, it's the relation that is being grasped, not necessarily like just the attribute. Like, and I think that's what he's kind of referring to when he says the attributes are not ways of seeing pertaining to the intellect, because the intellect perceives what is. They're not emanations. There's no sort of secondary thing happening here. There's not superiority. There's no one being. The use of eminence in two different ways is fascinating in this paragraph. Fucking Deleuze. Eminence the first time being that of like the dividing the superiority, the kingly eminence of substance over attributes, or attributes over another. It's not that. It's the relationship. All the essences distinct in the attributes are as one in substance, to which they are related by the attributes. So we're talking about kind of attributes as, actually, it's to just say out loud again, because I'm trying to work my way through this. There's a lot happening. This last sentence, all the essences distinct in the attributes are as one in substance, to which they are related by the attributes. So this is basically talking about how attributes, I don't want to say denote, but I don't have another word in my vocabulary for it. But that the relationship between attribute and substance basically is the view of the essence, the expression of the essence.
So he, in the previous definition, he doesn't define the the absolute essence as constituted by the attributes?
Do that one more time for me. Sorry. There's a
So
lot
that,
of, this
so
is,
that the attributes are not necessarily they're related to the essence, the absolute essence, but they he also describes them as constituting the essence, right? Constituting the absolute substance. So it sounds like he's making the attributes and the absolute essence or substance one and the same,
well,
almost almost
sort
the
of
same thing.
maybe. So like maybe it's the substances have attributes, and the intellect just is sort of, I don't want to say apperceiving, but like these things are seen. And it's not so much that the attributes are ways of seeing pertaining to the intellect. Instead, what's happening is that the intellect is grasping the relationship between the attributes and the substance. And the relation is the attributes. So the way Spinoza puts it in the Scholia 1 that is in here, an attribute is that which the intellect perceives of substance as constituting its essence, therefore must be conceived through itself. So the relationship is that the intellect perceives the substance, perceives the attributes, and this relationship constitutes its essence. And that's kind of what I think he's saying in the last sentence here. Derek?
Yeah, just sort of rereading it. Yeah.
It's a weird, I'm trying to figure it out. So it's, because it's that
Well,
last sentence is a pain.
I think, I think, like I say, the definition, it brings in the intellect, substance, and essence. So all those three are brought in, and this is the definition of an attribute. So what the intellect perceives of substance. So again, remember, substance is, it's kind of, well, what is substance? It's what a thing is.
Mhm.
It's what we are, what things are, and what the intellect perceives of substance as constituting its essence. And one point of essence, anyway, from the previous entry, is that it's only when we have the kind of interior engagement, trying to think the right word, engagement with the essence rather than exterior one, that we are in control of. We're active. Yeah, we escape the passive and become active, and so the passion, they're not passions, they're actions. I think that's the kind of structure that's being. So we attain this state of blessedness that we talked about last week. The blessedness are the active joys. I think that this is the attribute, the mind or the intellect, what it perceives as substance. So it kind of perceives of the thing as it is, and its essence. So that is a kind of crucial thing from last week, I would say, is that these are how adequate ideas are formed through the direct engagement with the essence.
Can we try the next paragraph? See if it starts to make sense soon.
Yeah, I just have one more question.
Please.
Do you understand the intellect to be, different from consciousness, or is it the same kind of a kind of conscious awareness? I mean, it's a form of understanding, right? The intellect is expressive of the attributes and that how it perceives itself, right? Yeah, that's the same way it says
How I get it,
intellect.
how I understand it, and the way he sort of has it written is intellect in more the sense of the faculty of the intellect, the process, the faculty, the thing that's doing it. I don't think we're at consciousness quite yet, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyone have a different read on that one?
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the intellect. Actually, is an entry in this
Well,
dictionary,
yes.
and
Do we want to jump ahead?
so he said the intellect. No, yeah. So, well, I'm just trying to answer JK's question. The
Fair.
intellect, whether infinite or finite, is only a mode of the attribute of thought. So, it's within this kind of structure that Spinoza is setting up. It's a mode of the attribute of thought. So, anyway, I just
No,
trying to answer
that's
that
fair.
question, because
That's fair.
otherwise we can endlessly speculate and never come to.
Yeah, it's the way Deleuze does define it later. And so it would be a mode, which is attribute, which is the essence of substance. There's a whole layer of things happening. Ugh. All right. To continue. Each attribute is conceived through itself and in itself. The attributes are distinct in reality. No attribute needs another or anything pertaining to another in order to be conceived. Hence, they express substantial qualities that are absolutely simple. Consequently, it has to be said that a substance corresponds to each attribute qualitatively or formally, not numerically. A purely qualitative formal multiplicity, defined in the first 8 propositions of the Ethics, makes it possible to identify a substance for each attribute. The real distinction between attributes is a formal distinction between ultimate substantial quiddities. Quiddities? Quiddities?
Quiddities, yeah.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
feel very
quiddity.
stupid. Anyone want to explain that shit to me? Quiddity?
I did look it up. I did look it up, but I've completely forgotten what the answer was.
It's another term for the essence of an object. It's whatness, or what is. What it is. The term quiddity derives from the Latin word quidditas, which was used by medieval scholastics, probably Spinoza, since all of this is written in Latin. It's a literal translation of the equivalent term from Aristotle's Greek, to T in an I, or the what it was to be a given thing.
Yeah, and that seems to bring us again within that field of the essence,
Yep.
essence of substance. So in this paragraph, it says each attribute is conceived through itself and in itself. So it's not. I mean, so there's 2 things in this. I would say it's conceived through itself. So it's I'm trying to think of it's conceived it through itself. It's not allied to something exterior, and it's kind of anyway. We're going to come to cause next, but there is this relationship to kind of self-causal. But it's this, and also in itself. So again, it's this singular thing. It's the thing in itself. So it's conceived through itself and in itself. I mean, it's a bit confusing, that I think, but so there are definitely two separate things there, but obviously related. And he said the attributes are distinct in reality. No attribute needs another. And I think that this kind of develops that quote. The attributes are distinct in reality. No attribute needs another. So it's conceived through itself, or anything pertaining to another, in order to be conceived. So I think that this is that kind of. So he starts with that quote from Spinoza, and then he kind of expands it. So the attributes are distinct in reality. So they're distinct. They're kind of one. I think that's the idea. In reality, and no attribute needs another or anything pertaining to another in order to be conceived. So it's this again. It's this notion which will appear towards the end of this, I think. But it's kind of singularity, I suppose you could say. And he said, hence they express substantial qualities that are absolutely simple. So the qualities of the substance are simple. They're not how should I say? They're not composite or not composite.
Yes,
I would say
absolutely. I think that's what he's getting at. Actually, is that there's no I don't want to say double attribute, but there's no like group of attributes that are really sort of mixed together. They're fairly much their own thing, understood through themselves and in itself, as he said.
Yeah. And it says, so consequently, it has to be said that substance corresponds to each attribute qualitatively or formally. So these terms are kind of, I don't know. So I would say formally is a more, well, it means, again, that this means the thing in itself, like when I think about it. Yeah, I would say that these two terms, when I think about it, might well relate to those two things that in that quote, conceived in itself, conceived through itself and in itself. So I kind of feel that that is another way of expressing that, is qualitatively and formally. I mean, I think formally definitely. I'm less sure about the qualitative element of that, but I don't know. And then he goes on, a purely qualitative formal multiplicity defined in the first 8 proposition. It makes it possible to identify a substance for each attribute. But I think that this is the kind of core of the kind of Spinoza's, I mean, he opens in chapter 2. So he says that the great theoretical thesis of Spinoza, a single substance having an infinity of attributes. So that this is back to that, makes it possible to identify a substance for each attribute. So the real distinction between attributes is a formal distinction between ultimate substantial qualities. So the attributes are what they are in themselves, I would say. So again, I think yes, definitely. When I think about it, it's definitely taking that opening quote from Spinoza and then expanding on it in this paragraph.
Yeah, and I think one of the big pushes he's also making is just making distinct quantitative versus qualitative. Like it's kind of repeated 4 or 5 times in here that they are necessarily qualitative, that they're not numerical. They're not the quantitative elements of a thing. That's not really the thing that does it. And he's just going through that, and then he names out, and the way he sort of says that the first 8 propositions of ethics run through this. The first 8 propositions are very much these things, and they're actually very simple. Substance is by nature prior to modifications. 2 substances whose attributes are different have nothing in common. Things which have nothing in common cannot be the cause of the other. Then he just kind of is running through these things and talking through the way that substance and these things sort of come across, but that attributes, as we're talking about them, are, it's part and parcel and base shit as far as he's concerned.
Is this related to the atomic theory and the multiplicity of objects, like partial objects? He refers to, the molecular realm of the ritual, perhaps. This is Deleuze interpreting.
Yeah, it's Deleuze.
Spinoza,
This
right?
is Deleuze. It's where he says the line, a purely qualitative formal multiplicity. This is attributes. They are a purely qualitative formal multiplicity. They are indeed separate because, again, one is not necessarily mixed with another, one attribute and another. They are defined themselves, but through the substance, which all the attributes are all part of that substance, explaining its essence, they're necessarily a qualitative multiplicity. That last line, the real
So the word,
distinction. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So the word quiddities would mean something like, the atomic element, or maybe even further down, an infinite, realm of partial objects, or molecular substances, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a. Well, I'm hesitant.
It relates more to essence, though.
Sorry, go ahead, Derek.
I think it relates more to essence, and I think the notion of quality. I think we need to understand that. I think it's quite important that, because sort of quality of something. If you talk about a quality, it's the kind of thing that I'm trying to think this one through. So it's a kind of a quality is something that something has. It's something. I'm just trying to think. I mean, for example, I think an example that Deleuze uses somewhere is paint. If you paint a wall white, then its quality is that it's white. That's its quality. It's not its form; it's its quality. You know what I mean? I think we need that, because I think the qualitative relationship is quite important one to try and kind of grasp. So, because he says it's a purely qualitative formal, so it's dual. It's qualitative formal, and I think if we go back, it's conceived through itself and in itself. And I think that those qualitative is the thing when it's conceived through itself. And I think this will hopefully become a bit clearer.
I wish it would. There is no definition for quality or qualitative because, of course, that would be a thing. Why do that? Why would anyone need that help?
I think quality is what a substance has. I think it's like an attribute. You could, if you think of an attribute in a literal sense, you could say, well, that's its quality. You could say that, but the formal aspect though is that it's a thing in itself. It's not. Doesn't relate to. It has not other thing. It doesn't, as he said, it doesn't need another or anything pertaining to another in order to be conceived. So I think this is I think that this is the kind of this is why there are two things. A purely qualitative form multiplicity makes it possible to identify a substance for each attribute.
There has to be. It's proposition 5 is there cannot exist in the universe two or more substances having the same nature or attribute. So there's so much more happening here than just this little paragraph is belying. I mean, we're going to end up getting through it at some point, but there's a lot more happening here for Deleuze. God. Next paragraph. We know only two attributes, and yet we know there is an infinity of them. We know only two because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence, thought and extension, inasmuch as we are mind and body. But we know that there is an infinity of attributes because God has an absolutely infinite power of existing, which cannot be exhausted either by thought or extension. Wow. Once in a while, it feels like I had a stroke before I read a sentence, and that one did it. We know only two attributes, do we? Do we? He claims them here. He says that they are thought and extension.
Yeah, because the mind, the intellect is limited in its understanding, so it only knows the body and the mind. But in terms of attributes, they're infinite, right?
So I mean, he begins by saying the attributes are the same, and it says to the extent they constitute the essence of substance, and to the extent that they involved in and contain the essences of mode. So essence of substance and essence of mode. That's a kind of expansion, I would say. What we had earlier. So the essence of mode, essence of substance. And the modes, like the modes are the affections. Remember from last week,
Yes.
the affections. So that when one body kind of composes or decomposes our own body, and he says we know only two. We know only two because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence, thought and extension, as much as we are. And I think that the point here seems to be that we can only conceive as, so we know only two attributes, I mean, the notion of the attributes is implied here is that they're infinite. We know only two because we can only conceive it as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence. So it's thought and extension. So thought, the kind of, thought, and extension space, inasmuch as we are mind and body. But he says we know that there is an infinity of attributes because God is an absolutely infinite power of existing, which cannot be exhausted either by thought or by extension. And I think so. In the previous one, the first paragraph, we had that kind of relationship between essence, attribute, substance, and whatever else it was. The intellect. Yeah. And I think here, so that this kind of idea of the notion, well, let's call it the notion of God, keeps appearing. And I think God's, I would say, brings with it the notion of infinity. I think that seems to be the kind of role of God's role in this. He says we know that there is an infinity of attributes because God has an absolutely infinite power of existing, which cannot be. I mean, the word "existing" again is a term that will be explained later. So again, which infinite power. Well, infinite power of existing, which cannot be exhausted either by thought or by extension.
Okay, then I'm going to ask stupid questions. So if thought and extension, because those are the two that he's mentioning here, are attributes of God, which is literally ethics 1 and 2. Those are the two propositions. Thinking is an attribute of God, and extension is an attribute of God. It's ethics 2, 1 and 2. Great. But that first sentence is really throwing me for a loop because we've been talking about attributes. We've been, even as we were reading of and talking of different attributes that are not simply only thought and extension, that there are other essences of things. But are there not? Because we only know of two. That's, I think, the thing that's throwing me for a loop.
I think he's using two senses of the word know. He says that the intellect only knows two of, the expression of attributes, which are mind and body. But then he says that we also know that there are an infinite number of attributes. So how do we know? Because I think that second, I think it's just basing on, his notion of reason. What he understands to be, it just you just have to accept it that by by the power of reason, you can assume that that's true. So there's a lot of assumptions behind that second use of the word know. I mean, the first one, no, of course, we only know about our mind and our body, but that's just at the very basic level of knowing. The other one is based more on more like knowing by way of rationality, perhaps.
Yeah, so I think if we go through this, I think it is kind of complex as always. So he says we know only two attributes, and yet we know there is an infinity of them. So we know two. There's two things that we know. So two attributes. We only know two attributes, but we also know there's an infinity of attributes. I think that's what the first sentence says. So there's no kind of, that's as far as it goes. Then he says we know only two. So he says why we know only two. We know only two because we can only conceive as infinite.
Because those are the only,
Those
oh my God. Okay. No, sorry, Derek. I'm sorry.
Those qualities that we involve in our essence. So these qualities, so again, it's this, we talked about the kind of purely quality, the quality from the previous paragraph. Only two because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence, thought and extension, in as much as we are mind and body. But if you, so just to go back to the first sentence, we know only two attributes, we know there's infinity of them. And in a way, we could say the word infinite means there's a never-ending supply of them or something like that. But I think if we look at it in a different way, that the attributes are infinite, and I think if we just stop there rather than, and then don't apply another thing onto it. And he said we know only two because we can only conceive as infinite. So they are infinite. I think he said that in the first paragraph. So we can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve. So we only know two attributes because those are the attributes, the qualities of ourselves, they involve in our essence. So we, the qualities or the attributes of our essence, which are thoughts and extension, which obviously thought relates to mind and extension
Is body.
Relates to body. And he says, but we know, right, so I think, again, it's starting from the first sentence and then expanding in the rest of the paragraph expands on this in two ways. So the first sentence says two things. We know only two attributes, and yet we know there is an infinity of them. And he says, we know only, right, the first then, we know only two, we know there are only two. We know only two because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence, thought and extension, in as much as we are mind and body. And again, we need to remember, obviously, that the kind of the point of the kind of Spinoza kind of analysis is through mind and body, and it's fundamentally through the body. And it go back to the beginning of chapter 2. We don't know what a body can do, and it's like this. It's the thing that kind of downgrades consciousness. It's the body. Through the body, we understand the mind. The mind adds the unconscious. But anyway, so we've got that opening sentence of 2 points are being made. The first point is then covered in the next sentence. And the second point, we know that there is an infinity of attributes because God has so we know we are familiar with God, shall we say, I don't know if it's a good word, has an absolute infinite power of existing, which cannot be exhausted either by thought or by extension. So God is without end. There's no end to God's thought. There's no end to God's extension. Spatiality, shall we say, or wherever it is.
I think, and I think, things are starting to click a little bit better because of stuff you said, Derek. I think the first sentence, I think, is actually going to be really it. We know only two attributes. We know only two because we only conceive as infinite those qualities we involve in our essence. Our essence, because we are mind and body, is thought and extension. Those are the only elements we can conceive of at that scale, as at infinity. There are a lot of other things that are probably infinite. We know God as such, who's not limited in the same way we are, has all the essences. There's an extraordinary number of essences. And so as such, the God would have an infinite number of attributes. But us, as in like person Brooks, person Derek, whatever, like we have those two attributes because those are the qualities we involve in our essence. The same way, and he says it earlier, attributes can only be conceived of through themselves and in themselves. One of the things he says to Oldenburg, we actually read those parts a little bit earlier in those letters. And so because these attributes are deeply distinct, whatever other attributes there are, and there are probably a fuck ton of them, they only can perceive like. They only conceive through themselves and in themselves. In the same way that body can't be conceived through mind or mind through body. These are two separate essences and attributes that he's talking about here. And so because of that, we may be limited in sort of how we're able to see it, but God, being infinite, has that power, and it can't be exhausted simply by thought or extension, which are just two of these attributes.
Yeah, I think our essence is mind and body, and the quality of those essences is thought and extension. I think that's where I would perhaps put that. So, but we know there's an infinity of attributes because God is an absolutely infinite power. It cannot be exhausted. So either by thought or by extension.
Yeah. I'm going to continue the next paragraph because I think it's going to finish out that thought. The attributes are strictly the same to the extent that they constitute the essence of substance and to the extent that they are involved in and contain the essences of mode. For example, it is in the same form that bodies imply extension and that extension is an attribute of divine substance. In this sense, God does not possess the perfections implied by the creatures in a form different from that which the perfections have in the creatures themselves. Thus, Spinoza radically rejects the notions of eminence, equivocity, and even analogy, notions according to which God would possess the perfections in another form, a superior form. The Spinozan immanence is therefore no less opposed to emanation than to creation, and immanence signifies, first of all, the univocity of all attributes. The same attributes are affirmed of the substance they compose and of the modes they contain. The first figure of univocity, the two others being that of cause and that of necessity, or the necessary. The necessity in the original.
Yeah, so this brings us the full implication, I would say, of what's been spoken about. So the attributes are strictly the same to the extent that they constitute the essence of substance, to the extent that they involve in and contain the essence of mode. So the attributes here they're just attributes, and they're not then extended further. They are what they are in themselves. This is the attributes as they are in themselves. They're strictly the same, and because of that, they're the same to the extent they constitute the essence of substance and to the extent that they involve in and contain the essences of mode. So there's essence, substance, essence of mode. So the essence of the affections, I would say. And he gives an example. For example, it's in the same form that bodies imply extension. That extension is an attribute of divine substance. So it's the same form that bodies imply extension, and extension is an attribute of divine substance. So we just continue with that. In this sense, God does not possess the perfections implied by the creatures in a form different from that which these perfections have in their creatures themselves. So this is the kind of what shall I say? One of the kind of really radical ideas of Spinoza and why he was kind of decried by kind of religious figures. So here, God, ourselves, God, are the same. You know, there is this notion of there's no eminence. He says he calls it eminence. You know, or there's a kind of superiority. So we are made in God's image, for example, is a kind of common way of thinking about that. So it said, so in the same form, bodies imply extension, and that extension is an attribute of divine substance. So it's the same form, the same kind of attribute, same kind of form of the attribute. Yeah, the same form of extension. It applies to both to bodies, what we are, or what we have, what we are part. You know, what we are, body and mind, but also implies to God. It says, in this sense, God does not possess perfections implied by the creature. So God is not the perfect, not the perfect, but you know the thing in which everything is made in God's image, that kind of idea, applied by the creatures in a form different from that which these perfections have in the creatures. So it's like God is the most. In fact, there is a scholastic definition of God as the most perfect. There is a Latin term like perfectissimus, something like that. I probably just made that word up, but
no, it's not. It's not far
God
from how
is the most
Spinoza
perfect.
talked about it. It's not far from how Spinoza talked about it.
Yeah. So in the scholastics or medieval philosophy, there is this notion. It's obviously based. It's kind of theological, and God is the kind of ultimate and the most perfect. Whereas now, what Spinoza is saying that there is one substance and with an infinity of attributes.
So is he saying that there's
So
no there's no transcendent God that is separate from the world of that we exist in. That the world that we exist in is really just an expression of that same essence of God, right?
No, I
Like
think
in,
what he's saying. Well, in the previous one, he talks about the third kind of knowledge in that uh, our essences. So our essence, other essences, and the essence of God. So there's no. I would say fundamentally the idea is that there's no superiority of one over the other. I think that's what's being said. So this is where, and so he says, Deleuze says, Spinoza radically rejects the notion of eminence. So there is something eminent, something superior, and equivocity in that equivocity. So this is obviously equivoc. I'm trying to. It's one of those terms that always escapes me, but it's obviously it's different. It's kind of thing can be said in many ways. That's the way I'm trying to think, because it's being contrasted with univocity. That's the point. Equivocity is that the idea that there's many ways of in many ways of saying being. That's what it is. That's the way of saying it succinctly, I would say.
Yeah,
And
Spinoza hates
even
that.
analogy. So and then analogy. So something is like something. There's the notion of likeness. And the notion of God which possesses the perfections in the form of superior. So that he's just going through those three notions of eminence, equivocity, analogy, rejecting all three. Spinoza's immanence is therefore no less opposed to emanations than to creation. So it's no less opposed to emanation, so the kind of superior one over the other, than to creation, I would say, being created by God. And immanence, first of all, signifies first of all the univocity of it, so they're all said in with one voice. They're all the same, said in one being. I would say that's a way of saying it. Same attributes. Well, he says the same attributes are affirmed of the substance they compose and of the modes they contain. So it's the same attributes are affirmed of the substance they compose and of the modes they contain. And the first figure of univocity, the two others being that of cause and that of, so that is what he calls the first figure of univocity. Same attributes are affirmed of the substance they compose and of the modes they contain. And then there's two other figures of univocity which we'll see, cause, which is the next entry, and perhaps necessary. I don't know if that's one, but if it is, we'll see it.
Yeah, this is so. A lot of this is because it's the early sections of the Ethics. Is ultimately Spinoza's making his way through defining God, how God works. It's this is juxtaposing. As I'm reading it, it seems to be juxtaposing what I would call a more traditional view of God, that God exists in another form, in another way that is unique from us, separate from us, different from us, as if God were ethereal, sort of by nature, and that we are in a different plane, different area, not spiritual, whatever it may be, blah, blah, blah. And Spinoza's argument against that, or his argument here, is that it's not really that the way that we speak of, or the way that we differentiate, or the way that we talk of stuff, we're able to talk of God. It's not that God exists on different planes, that God's the attributes that God shares with us, because attributes know attributes, and they sort of deal with each other. God thinks God is an extension, and as such, because those are things, are essences that we share with him, we perceive him through that, but there is an infinity to him that goes far beyond that. These are just simply essences we do not have the capacity of. We aren't things with those, we aren't substance with those attributes. And so the attributes, as he says here, are strictly the same to the extent they constitute the essence of the substance, and the extent they are involved in and contain the essences of mode. And this is where he says, in this sense, God does not possess perfections implied by creatures in a form different from that which these perfections have in the creatures themselves. Spinoza is rejecting the notion of immanence, division, equivocity, and analogy. Instead, it's much more about the univocity of the attributes, the same attributes affirmed of the substance they compose and of the modes they contain. And that's the first figure of univocity. The others will come in other ways. That's kind of how I'm grasping it, at least right now. Thoughts? Anything? Anyone? Please. Because we're about to
Yeah,
go
and
to
I think
cause, which is one of those.
I think it would be useful to think what's the implications of this thinking, and so it's antagonistic to the idea that there's a transcendent God, we're made in God's image, and we are, and this also that notion of morality. So we get our laws, the commandments of God, we have to obey regardless. They're there. So as we know, it's a kind of practical philosophy. How do we live our lives? And so there is nothing is superior to some other thing. And then that's what I would say, and it is a kind of radical empiricism. I would say that's the way I would
No, I would,
describe it.
I would very much agree. And there's an interesting play that's happening where it's deeply blasphemous to say that we share anything with God, at least directly. That it's not we were made in His image, but as a sort of inferior copy. He's not saying that at all. He's saying no, we actually have things we share with God almost directly, very much directly. God has an infinity to Him, so there's a weird, almost blasphemy, like a rejection of the traditionalist values of the way of seeing things. But at the same time, there's a kind of beautiful, I don't know, I don't want to say like bringing in God or retaining that sort of infinity. But that's probably actually what I will say, because it's not like he's simply saying, well, blah, blah, and just getting rid of it. But instead, there is still that sort of God as the infinite substance we share with Him. So it's really an interesting interplay that doesn't really do away with sort of the majesty, you might say, of God, but puts Him much more. Yes, Jean-Claire, exactly. It puts God more in reality.
You say
think
some. You see a relationship between this, view with Taoism from Eastern philosophy. That the Tao is in everything. Even in the lowest, things in life.
Bit of a
In the
difference.
dung.
There's a bit of a difference in that
Yeah.
we as he's sort of talking here, and as he says sort of throughout the ethics, we aren't God. We aren't like one with God. We share attributes, and these are the attributes we share with God, and all of that. And the substance of those attributes is sort of everything, all of that. So there's some sort of layers. There's a layer of complexity added to this that I think Taoism, generally speaking, at least my readings of it, don't share, or kind of this stands very much alone, especially during the time period, because we are also adding in this sort of secondary layer of how things are conceived of, how we sort of do it, that it's not a dualism, it's not also a rejection of that dualism, it's a whole other thing. Because again, it's we, in as much as we are mind and body, and we are thought and extension. And Spinoza, these are two separate attributes. So it's not a dualism, but it's not saying that mind and body are the same thing. It's understanding them as attributes of a substance, and that substance that is sort of I don't know, shared, or the substance, the infinite substance, whatever. It's doing a different play. At least again, how I've been reading it. Derek, you had something?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think I was saying earlier, it'd be kind of useful to try and think the implications of this thinking that we've encountered so far. But one of them is that, as you said in the previous section, there's a kind of relationship between ourselves, others, and God. There is this relationship, but it's not like God is up there somewhere, and there's a completely a different relationship. It's not. It's a kind of the difference is between the passive and the active, and and he says the other point he talks about. He says I'm referring to the previous entry. He says he talks about the eternal mode, and I think that is, for me, I feel that's where this kind of notion of God comes in, because we attain this state of blessedness once we are kind of in contact with these adequate ideas of the affecting body, and so we are, instead of passions, we have actions, and so he uses this term blessedness, which is a term he uses for what he calls these active joys. And he said that they escaped notion of transitions, change. So the effects are in their kind of in their passive form are experienced of change, a change of feeling from sadness to joy, that kind of thing. But in the state of blessedness, it's an active joy which is not a transition from one to the other. And he says it's something we have in this it's an eternal mode. So, which I would kind of relate to the idea of God, although he does use the word infinite, I think more, so it might not be.
There is a lot that comes on from this. It's hard for me not to go to Deleuze's other book on Spinoza, which literally I want to say is just about the attribute and essences, and the expression of them. So that's why it's called expressionism and expressionism. So it's hard for me not to sort of dive in deeply there, because there's a lot more built out. If you're looking, or anyone's interested in diving specifically into this, there's a lot. One of the things that is, as I'm reading this, my kind of question would be, the way it's sort of laying out is that the attribute of the substance, attributes, okay, how do I put this? Once we have found an attribute, we've assigned it. We have, in this case, for example, mind, body, or sorry, the attributes, the qualitative essence of them, thought and extension. Thought and extension would be attributes of a substance, and that substance and those attributes, that attribute, each one of these, they are separate, they're unique. My question would be, since they then apply to that said substance or the related substance of it, would that then fuck, this is a nightmare. I'm having a trouble time with this one, because it's just bending enough of what I thought I understood as we read through this. It's always fun to do a close reading, because it breaks, readings you do in your head, especially with other people.
Yeah, I'm still having trouble with understanding that he says we know that we have the mind and extension, and thought and body and so. But but then he says we also know that we have that there are infinite attributes. The question is, how does he know that? How do you know that you have these infinite attributes?
Yeah, he says that he says two things. We know only two attributes, which, because we can only conceive of infinite qualities that we involve in our essence, thought, and extension, in as much as we have mind and body. But we know that there is an infinity of attributes, because God has an absolutely infinite power of existing, which cannot be exhausted either by thought or by extension. So I think what that means is, when I think about it now, is that if we think about God, we can't, there's no point at which God ends, in terms of both thought and in terms of extension. So God is, we can't conceive a God that ends, that comes to an end, or a God that is that we can capture in our thought. Because as soon as we capture God in our thought, we have a kind of, let's say we conceptualize God, we have a concept of God, then God is no longer infinite.
Well, I think a big reason for it is literally that's how the ethics starts. He's saying that God is absolutely infinite. He is a substance consisting in infinite attributes, of which each expresses eternal and infinite essentiality. So there's, because when we're talking about the substance, we're talking about the attributes of substance. The attributes themselves don't get mixed up. We don't confuse, for example, thought and extension. These are two different things. They stand alone. They are separate, but they are of substance. I don't want to say the substance because that sort of particularizes it. It's just substance. Spinoza doesn't really talk about the substance. It's just substance, that stuff that is in and itself and is conceived through itself, that which a conception can be formed independently of any other conception. This is where I'm getting stuck, is the idea that, well then, okay, we've got thought and extension. These two things we understand through themselves, not through each other. It's not sort of crisscross. They're two independent essences, two qualities. So by that point, do we have two substances, or is there one substance with these attributes that we're seeing?
There must be only one substance. I think that's the whole point of the
Right. All essences distinct in
the
attributes are as one in substance, to which they are related by the attributes. Right? That's the first paragraph ends that way. The essence is the expressed unlimited infinite quality, but attributes aren't mixed together. The attributes themselves are conceived through itself and in itself. Attributes are distinct in reality. No attribute needs another or anything pertaining to another. So there is one substance with an infinite number of essences or attributes that those attributes, like is able to see like, more or less. We're able to understand God through thought and through extension, not through other things, because those are the two that we've got. As he's saying about, we know there are an infinity of them because God as infinite, or a substance as infinite, has all of those. But those are not things that we involve in our essence, those other attributes. And so we're not able to see them. Again, then my question would be, is this basically a substance that is then being seen from or understood through thought and then extension, as if it's almost, I'm really trying not to go phenomenologist on this. Like I'm having trouble.
I think we need to understand the word substance, because what a thing is, and it's, if you say a substance, you're saying, you're making it singular, or not singular. You're making it particular, should we say? Whereas the point is, it's everything. Substance is a term that applies to everything. It's like, and it is. It's what something is. Everything is. Substance is what everything is. So it's not kind of, you wouldn't say, like, I don't know, substance, a table or a chair substance. It's just substance. It's dealing in those primary kind of, let's say metaphysical kind of categories, shall we say? But that's probably the wrong way of saying it. But I think, he says we know only two attributes, and yet we know there is an infinite. So that is the point of that paragraph. And he said we know only two because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities. So we can only think of things as infinite, only those qualities that we ourselves possess. So it's only through the fact that we are mind and body that we understand the attributes of thought and extension. So it's only because we have that, but we can't through that. But then through our, if we apply our thought, if we apply our intellect to God, shall we say, we find God is infinite, because there is no limit to God's, no limit to God. Well, in relation to ourselves, there's no limit to God's thought, to God in thought, and no limit to God in extension in space. God has an absolutely infinite power of. I think the word power is important there. So God has an infinite power which cannot be exhausted either by thought. So God can't come to an end. We can't come to an end of what God is, or by thinking about God, or by the attribute of the attribute of thought or the attribute of extension. Neither of those make God kind of finite, I would say.
Yeah, but
So
I think
you're
the problem.
so you're just describing the an adequate idea, right? An adequate idea of God.
so where I'm getting hung up is, I think, the way that he's talking about and utilizing substance. Because as we've been talking about it, and as I've kind of always understood Spinoza and read Spinoza, is that God is substance, is the substance that contains infinite attributes. But he says here, top of 52, it has to be said that a substance corresponds to each attribute qualitatively or formally, not numerically. This would state differently. This would be a substance per attribute. So every attribute has a substance, every substance an attribute. And that's fucking with me, to be frank.
But it's still
I
expressing
think no.
the
I think
same.
he brings them together. So he says, following on from that, he says a purely qualitative formal multiplicity defined in the first proposition that makes it possible to identify substance for each attribute. So a purely I think that's the point where that a purely qualitative formal multiplicity defined in the first 8 properties of the ethic makes it possible to identify a substance. I think it's not like saying, I know it reads strangely because it sounds like for each attribute there's a different substance.
Yes.
But I think what it means is that there's a substance. Each attribute is the same. Well, it's the same substance.
Well, then I would, okay. So then when Spinoza says, by attribute, I mean that which the intellect perceives as constituting the essence of substance. So there is a play happening here to just sort of say out the only way that this makes sense to me is there is substance, God. We, humans, exist in a way that is in thought and extension. Because we exist in thought and extension, and because attributes really are only able to see attributes, they don't really cross over. The body, the intellect doesn't really sort of get body. Thought doesn't really get extension. Extension and thought sort of don't sort of go together necessarily. Each one is the essence of substance, God being substance, the infinite. But we perceive a substance that corresponds to the attribute that we are perceiving. As he says, it makes it possible to identify a substance for each attribute. The real distinction between attributes is a formal distinction between ultimate substantial quiddities. And this is this sort of thing that he then plays with, where we've got the attributes strictly to the same, the attributes are strictly the same to the extent they constitute the essence of substance, to the extent that they are involved in and contain the essences of mode. But again, because we are, and again, I'm really trying to stay away from the phenomenologist side, but it seems like what's talking about here is that the intellect perceives these things as constituting the essence of substance because the intellect, which is the capacity, is for us is in thought and in extension. We're seeing those two things, and therefore those two substances. Really hard not to go slightly phenomenologist on this, honestly, and I'm not really. It seems unsatisfying to me.
I think one shouldn't think of substance as God. I think that's the first thing I would say, because that is a kind of theological kind of argument. I think that in fact it's the opposite of that. It's substance. What is substance is what a thing is. But I think Spinoza is going to building on that. That's the kind of kind of, I mean, I don't know if it's exact what I've just said, but that's a kind of traditional understanding of substance.
By God, I mean
And
a being absolutely infinite, a substance consisting in infinite attributes. I mean, how do I not read that as that God and substance are the same?
yeah, but we're all substance. That's the point. Everything is substance.
Yes, but not like
He's just saying, well, he's just saying the particular attributes of God. I mean, this is what I mean. This is where kind of God comes in. You know, it has this kind of this notion of infinity, I would say, attached.
Well,
Yeah,
well,
and
there's
there is this kind of
yeah, substance has both infinite difference and infinite repetition of the of the same difference.
I think we shouldn't. I think we're going too far. I think we should just say. I mean, there is an entry for substance, which kind of.
well, you did ask
deals
what are
with
the
this, I would say.
implications of this? Like, just saying.
Yeah, no, but no, I meant the implications beyond not the, or what should we say, metaphysical implications. But although there's that, but like because it's a practical philosophy, what are the implications for ourselves and the way we live our lives? You know, that's what I mean by that implications. Because if basically, I think what he's saying, I think what he's saying in this entry and the previous one, the affections and effects, is that there's this we know ourselves, others, and the essence of our we can know ourselves, others, the essence of others, and the essence of God, and from that we enter a kind of this active mode of blessedness, and which is, and he says it is an eternal mode. I think that is the kind of structure that's being set up here, I would say. But this
I agree to a point, but then there's, so to me, it's and again, it is maybe just beyond pedantic for me, but to me, there's some odd thing happening here that I'm trying to grasp in the way he's wording all of this and the way he's putting it together, because he's really going hard, and he says early on, he's like, look, this is the first bits of the ethics, the first 10 or 8 notes or whatever he says, that this is over. This is where we talk about this. Great. Here is where also Spinoza makes very specific statements about substance and God. They're very simple sentences. These are not things that like are really open to like wild interpretations for things. There cannot exist in the universe 2 or more substances that have the same nature or attribute. So then this is where I go. Well, so then mind and body, which is thought and extension, these attributes and qualities, we know that there is an infinity of attributes because God is an infinite power of existing, which cannot be exhausted by either thought or extension. We know only of these 2 attributes because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities we involve in our essence. This would imply that we share substance with God. I don't know how I can't infer how you can infer otherwise. Like, that's how I'm reading it, because there's only one substance. Substance has this attribute. These are the attributes we involve in our essence. They don't mix, and God has, like, this is, and thus why I am perplexed.
Yeah, he says we know there is an infinity of attributes.
Correct.
And he says, well, how do we know?
It's because God can't be
because
exhausted by those 2.
Yeah, because we, in our thinking, when we think about God, we can't come to a kind of an end in terms of either thought or in terms of extension, space or God, So I think that's the point, So we know we have it. We know it because we can't through our attributes, which are thought and extension. Those are things we then apply to God, and we know there must be an infinity because when we consider God in terms of extension, i.e., space, the kind of spatial limit of God, say, or in terms of thought, then God is beyond. We can't. I mean, we can never kind of adequately know God. I think that's that in terms of
Absolutely.
the two attributes, the attributes that are common to us, which are those of mind and body.
But
So the idea of an infinite substance could mean that the substance is the same and different. I mean, that's how I interpret it. That just because if it's infinite, then there could be there's possibility of a lot of differences, within that substance,
Well,
even though it's the
well, I
same.
don't think he said there's infinite substance. I don't think he has. Anyway, he said there's an infinity of attributes,
Right,
and
right.
he says
Yeah.
God as an infinite power of existing. So again, this notion of power. I mean, there is a kind of notion. We've got to think of it as in relation to the affections, and I mean the point. Again, I think the point of this is that he said that the attributes. The point is the final paragraph. The attributes are strictly the same to the extent that they constitute the essence of substance, and to the extent that they involved in and contain the essence of mode. So the attributes are the same, that they constitute the essence of substance. There is essence constituted by the attributes, and to the extent they involve and contain the essences of modes. So modes and substance are kind of have this relationship to attributes. And we can see, I mean, then he says, for example, it is in the same form that bodies imply extension. So all bodies in the same form, so there's the bodies that we encounter, they imply extension. Again, the word implication implies extension, and the extension is an attribute of divine substance. So in the same form. So it's not like God has a kind of superior. Again, it's this notion. It's not. This is the kind of point I think is that's being made here. It's this notion of univocity. It's not equivocity. It's not eminence. There's nothing superior. I think that's the kind of point that's being made in this section through the attributes. Is that the attributes are strictly the same to the extent that they constitute the essence of substance, and to the extent that they involve in and contain the essence of mode.
substance is necessarily infinite, just mentioning.
Yeah, the way I see it is that Spinoza is, and the way Deleuze is interpreting it is that he wants to avoid this kind of strict monism, because strict monism would be limited, in some way. So infinity would be kind of a limited quality. But if it's not a strict monism, that the multiplicity could be allowed to be infinite multiplicity. While at the same time it is the same substance with infinite attributes.
I've got a lot to read on this. This is still not clicking for me, but that's okay. Damn it. I don't want to start cause when we only have 20 minutes left, because I feel it'll start a conversation that I don't want to sort of begin and then not end. I think, Derek, for me, it's a question of how we're coming to and talking about it from the beginning. The question for this is really about how we sort of talk about the kind or categories, the attributes of substance, the qualities of things are, and I think a lot of these things I'm able to make the leap to where it's, it's not about eminence, sort of hierarchy, one overpowering. It's not equivocity, where things mean identical, and that doesn't really work because, again, I get the idea that if two things have identical attributes, they're the same thing. There's not two things that have identical attributes, so they can't really mean the same thing. The expressions can't be the same. The analogy, the idea of analogy, the idea which God would possess perfections in another form, a superior form, that there's multiple forms of things that are identical, doesn't work. This Spinozan immanence is no less opposed to immanence than to creation, because again, we're talking about causality and how it plays. Immanence signifies, first of all, the univocity of attributes. The same attributes are affirmed of the substance they compose and of the modes they contain. This I get until we start poking in and asking the handful of other things that are said along this. We know only these two attributes, mind and body, the qualities of them being sort of thought and extension. Each one of these has its own substance, or we have the substance that only has these two, God being this infinite substance with infinite qualities necessarily. We share these two, therefore we're able to see like sees like, but we are of a different substance. This feels counter to me to a lot of other things that I've understood from Deleuze and from Spinoza, that there is one substance and that the qualia come from that or extend from that. This is my back and forth I'm having trouble with because of how these are written. And translation is not the issue. The original is basically this. So I'm having a lot of trouble with the wording, and I apologize. I know it's not exciting, and it's probably frustrating.
Yeah, so I think so again, it's that small paragraph, the penultimate paragraph. So we know only two attributes, and yet we know there is an infinity of them. So we have 2 points being made, that we know only two attributes, and yet we know there's an infinity of them. We know only two because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so again, a point here I would say, we know only two because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence. So
the essence
involve
of
in
our
essence.
substance.
So I wouldn't. What I'm trying. Excuse me. I think the point of substance is not mentioned at this point. I think it's those qualities that we involve in our essence. So there's a kind of relating quality to essence. So those qualities. He's given the reason why we only know two attributes. Only two because we can only conceive, and again, it's the intellect that we can conceive as infinite. We can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence, thought and extension, in as much as we are mind and body. So, in a sense, in the fact that we are mind and body, those are, I think, so the attributes of mind and body. I'm trying to think, are these right? So, are we saying our essence is mind and body, and the qualities are thought and extension? So we know only two because we can only conceive as infinite those qualities that we involve in our essence, thought and extension, in as much as we are mind and body. That we are. Yeah, I feel that's what's being said. We are the essence. Our essence is. We're not substance and essence. So again, if we go back to the opening sentence, the intellect perceives of substance as constitutes its essence. So a substance has essence. So our essence is we're mind and body, and the attributes or the qualities of which are thought and extension. So
Yes.
that's ourselves. But we know that there's an infinity of attributes because God has only has an absolute infinite power of existing, which cannot be exhausted either by thought or by extension. So I think that here, what shall I say? What is not clear is because God has an infinite power of. We don't know what that means. I would say at this point, because again, I think the word existing is a an entry later on. So, but we know there's an infinity of attributes. We know because God has an absolutely infinite power of existing. So this is a kind of definition of God, I would say, an absolute, an infinite power of existing. So God is a power, but in the same way, I would say that we are powers of action. When we have this internal, when we have these adequate ideas of things that we come across. So there's an infinite power of existing, which cannot be, because it's infinite, cannot be exhausted by thought or by extension. It is a bit unclear because we're not familiar, I would say, with this notion of this infinite power of existing. That seems to be the key phrase, that we're not there yet, I would say. Yeah, then he says the next paragraph, the attributes are strictly the same to the extent that they constitute the essence of substance. So again, it's what we had in that opening definition. The attributes, what the intellect perceives of substance as constituting its essence. Attributes are strictly the same to the extent that they constitute the essence of substance. So all the attributes are the same, and they constitute the essence of, and there is one substance. And to the extent that they're involved in and contain the essences of mode. And the modes, as we know, are, the affections. This is when the bodies compose or decompose us, when they enter into ourselves and either compose or decompose ourselves. He said, and he gives an example. For example, it is in the same form that bodies imply extension. And it's going back, and just looking for the word, again, the word imply. But he talks about the implies, where are we? Implies the intellect somewhere, I think he says. It implies, the intellect. So the attribute implies an intellect that perceives it. For example, it is in the same form bodies imply extension, and that extension is an attribute of divine, an extension, and that extension is an attribute of divine substance. So bodies imply extension, and that extension is an attribute of divine substance.
Did everyone go silent while I went to the bathroom? Is that what happened?
No, we've just finished cause, and we're on to the next one now.
Yeah, really? Really? I had that. You go that much faster when I'm not here. Burn right through them.
Yeah. No, I'm just joking.
We're on the letter E.
We did
Thanks,
automatic.
Clear.
Yeah.
I actually would vote that we stop there and probably continue cause next week because it is its own entire thought, and I think it's worthwhile. Thoughts, opinions, anyone?
Yeah, good idea.
All right. That's a solid hour and 45 on one word and 4 paragraphs. So fucking Deleuze. Yeah, it's just it's an interesting one because I'm cracking open and reading through expressionism and philosophy, which is obviously a little different practical philosophy. Both Spinoza, both Deleuze's reading, both they're a few years apart, which is I think what makes it really interesting that practical comes far after. But the way he sort of dives into and talks through substance and expression and attribute, there's an entire chapter called Attributes as Expression. So, I mean, it's not a simple thing. And so we're trying to read into 4 paragraphs an entire philosophy. So there's more there, and more coming after we finish the glossary. That's one of the bonuses. There's a lot more in all of this, even through the glossary itself. So I think we just push through, make our way through, and get going. And we'll just keep figuring out as we go. It's gonna be fun. But with that, thank all of you for joining. We'll see you next Thursday as we try to make our way further through this. Yeah, that's about it. I think that's it. That's all I got. This melted my brain. This really melted my brain.
Yeah.
There's just so much happening here. It's crazy.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
In 4 fucking paragraphs.
Okay. All right.
Goddamn Deleuze. All right. Thank you guys. We'll talk to you soon, and we'll see you next week. See you all.
Thank you.